Hello everyone, it's me Bryson P and welcome to another video. This is a continuation from my previous video about the teachers in the United States and comparing them to the rest of the world. However, this one is the much longer video, so if you're interested in a longer video, stick around. This one is going to be about the problem with the American education system. This one is a second thought video, and according to them, this is talking about that Americans across the political spectrum tend to agree that our education system is failing our students. And in this episode, we will look at three of the biggest problems the system faces and consider some solutions. So I'm curious to see what the second thought considers those three biggest problems are, and I will give you my input and my thoughts and some personal experiences, and also my thoughts on what their possible solutions are and maybe some of my own solutions. So again, this is going to be a longer video, but I appreciate you for sticking around. I really do. And we're going to try and get straight into it because that's what we need to do for this not to be super long. So let's go. Okay, before we get started, there's two things I would like to point out. Number one, if you're just wanting to look through, because this is a longer video, so if you'd like to just check out certain sections of it or skip through because you've already seen this prior, then you're more than welcome to check out down in the description. You'll see I have everything kind of time stamped out for you. The second thing is, if you've seen my previous video, the short one about the American education system and the teachers, and all you want to see is the story I was talking about where I got suspended, but yet the kid who was trying to stab the other kid didn't, then check out the description also. I have that tagged in the timeline. So anyways, here we go.
In the United States, we like to pride ourselves on being the best at things. We spend more money than any other nation on our military, healthcare, and education. Unfortunately, simply throwing money at things doesn't make you the best at them. Our military, despite having the budget of the next 10 biggest spenders combined, is tremendously wasteful and is constantly used as a destabilizing force in regions we wish to dominate or exploit. Our healthcare system, despite occupying the world's #1 spot for per capita expenditure, is routinely ranked the worst in the developed world in terms of access, efficiency, and effectiveness. While each of these topics deserves its own video, in this episode we're going to focus on the US education system, why it's failing our students and teachers, and what we can do to fix it. Think back to your time in school. What do you remember? Early mornings, long windowless hallways punctuated by locked doors, a strictly regimented schedule. Your school life was dictated by the authority of the teacher, who conditioned you with countless commands every day. Sit down, open your textbook to page 10, stop talking, line up. You were punished for speaking to classmates, making a joke, or coming in a single minute late. You had to get permission to use the restroom. Class started with a bell and ended with a bell. There's another kind of institution that follows a similar structure. It shouldn't come as a surprise that in the US, many of the same architects who designed our prisons also designed our schools. For many of us, school is an unpleasant memory. Sure, most of us had fun with friends we made in class, but that fun was exclusively outside of school hours. Odds are the memory of your education itself is pretty negative. Besides the experience of attending American school, the outcomes the system produces are also less.
I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, but I've heard this phrase many times in my life, and many other Americans have heard this phrase, that that the American school system is a lot like the American prison system, that the way that it's structured is exactly like you said, that, you know, we are institutionalized as adolescents so that way we can follow a certain structure that they want us to follow.
Than stellar. Despite our cultural obsession with getting American students to perform well in standardized testing, our scores fall squarely in the middle of the pack compared to other industrialized nations. This single-mindedness also has a more critical consequence. By demanding our teachers simply prepare students for testing rather than fostering an actually effective learning environment, we end up with students who not only forget everything they crammed into their heads immediately after taking the test, but who also lack the skills required to learn effectively.
Yes, that's what I was going to say, but I'm glad that I let him say it first. So, in my time in school, pretty much whenever we would start in August, we would do a test at the beginning of the school year. And they would tell us that it really doesn't count, it really doesn't matter, but it's a state test to gauge where we are as students and what level we're at. And it's really also to gauge where the school is at for, you know, incoming students from 7th to 8th, 8th to 9th, so on, so on. And then you're tested again, you know, later on, prior to the end of the year, like, winter time. And then you test again at the end of school year to see where you've been. And those are the ones. But pretty much, yeah, all you're doing is you're learning the test. From the start to finish, you learn the test. You don't learn actual real world stuff. You learn the test, what's on the test, how to pass the test, how to figure out the answers to what's on the test. And that's it. It's about a test.
The students aren't the only ones suffering. The US has exceptionally high teacher turnover due to low pay and long hours, and compounding the problem, a teacher shortage.
We've already talked about that, so we're not going to get into that.
Our students are unhappy, perform poorly, and don't gain the critical skills they need. And our teachers...
If you're interested in knowing what I have to say about that, then you can check out the short one. That's up here, and if you have already, awesome, thank you.
Teachers are unhappy, overworked, and we don't have enough of them to meet a growing need. A country depends on its young people, those who will grow up and take the reins from the previous generations. So why are we failing them so badly? Before we get into some potential solutions, we need to understand the three main problems plaguing the American education system. These three problems are the system's outdatedness, its underfunding, and its privatization. The lack of funding and the rapid privatization of the education system go hand in hand. So let's start there. When you think of the average school, whether elementary, middle, or high school, you're generally thinking about a public institution. That is, a school that is federally funded and tasked with providing education to all people of the appropriate age in a given school district free of charge. Public schools have existed in the US since before it officially became a country, but the first Board of Education was established in Massachusetts in the year 1837. The person...
Now, I would like to say real quick before he gets too far, if he doesn't mention it, he did say free of charge, okay? But I would like to point out that even though you go to public school, if you make more than a certain amount of money, then you have to pay for certain things, such as like your books and your lunch. So because my parents made decent money, then even though I went to public school, it would still cost a little bit, it still cost them a couple $100s a year. And then also on top of that, it was a couple $100 a year for lunch, for between breakfast and lunch, breakfast, lunch every day. For the school year, it was a couple $100 a year, and then a couple $100 between, sports and books and different things like that. So it's not free unless you're poor, which then again, well, a lot of us are in the poverty rate, right? So, but it's not free unless you're, again, poverty. And then you can get free lunch too. You get free everything. Free everything.
Spearheading the Education Initiative, Horace Mann, believed that public education was the best way to overcome poverty, bridge social gaps, and prepare young people to enter the workforce. The Federal Department of Education was established 30 years later, with the goal of standardizing and helping to implement education across the country. What may be surprising to some is that private schools actually predate public schools in the US. As early as the 1660s, individual teachers were offering their services to young people and adults as a...
I also would like to point out that my education was a joke. I feel like my education as far as high school. Now, granted, I didn't take it near as serious as I should have, and a lot of that is on me, right? And if I knew then what I knew now, then I would definitely have paid more attention, and I would definitely have applied myself a lot more and gone a lot further with my education. But at the same time, I mean, I wasn't really in the best situation as far as school education environment to receive that type of education, that type of level of education. So, I mean, it was a pretty crappy school.
The way to supplement their income. This private schooling often took place in the evenings and was less structured than typical day school. By the beginning of the American Revolution, private schools had become pretty well established and were favored by those who could afford their fees. Fast forward to more modern times, and, like with healthcare and infrastructure, we begin to see a problem with accelerating privatization. The practice of privatization is simple. It entails the handing off of once public responsibilities to privately owned companies. Since the 80s, there's been a consensus, a deeply flawed one, but a consensus nonetheless, that there's nothing the government can do that the private sector can't do better. The word better is doing some heavy lifting here. Private companies often get things done more quickly or with a greater profit, but what free market enthusiasts fail to realize is that the outcomes are incredibly damaging, as is the case with American healthcare, or extremely fragile, as evidenced by private infrastructure projects. Take the Texas power grid, for example. It's entirely deregulated. This allows them to cut costs and make a greater profit. It also sets them up for disaster, as we saw with the recent winter storm that completely knocked out the state's power and left millions stranded in freezing conditions. Of course, a crisis like this is considered an acceptable risk when there's a nice profit to be had. This free market logic has...
If you didn't see any of this is pretty crazy too, because these people in Texas were getting like thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of utility bills for electricity or for gas because of this snowstorm.
Has slowly seeped into the realm of education. Over the past couple of decades, various federal initiatives have provided parents the option of using federal funds to send their children to private schools, whether by providing so-called school choice vouchers or allowing for the possibility of school transfers, where students can move from low-performing schools to higher-performing private schools. This has led to a number of problems. The most obvious is that by spending federal money to incentivize parents to enroll their children in private school, they've robbed public schools of badly needed funding. Why spend money to move kids around when you could simply fund the schools that are designed to be funded by that money? Because of this practice, public schools face a vicious cycle. There's not enough money to pay teachers, so teachers leave, which leads to more students in each class, which overwhelms the remaining teachers. There's not enough money for school supplies or even basic school maintenance, which leads to unsafe learning environments. These problems compound over time, which makes the schools perform worse, which then suggests...
The city I live in, we have a few high schools, we have a few middle schools, anyways, one of the high schools has had mold in it for years, and it's got paint peeling off the walls. It's bad. It's in bad condition. And then the high school I graduated from, the roof has caved in before, and then there was another time whenever I was in school where the gymnasium and all that was shut down for a couple weeks because it rained and the roof had collapsed there. And it's just, yeah. Bad. Like, I mean, I don't even really know what to say because a lot of this is kind of just, I mean, yeah, it's all true, but at the same time, I could go so far into this.
To the federal government that they're doing the right thing by incentivizing the move to private schools. Okay, but if the private schools perform better and the average parent can afford them, why not just...
The average parent can afford them? What average parent can afford them? Do you know how much a private school costs? I got 2 kids. I'm going to be honest. Look, I got 2 kids, right? And I've looked because I would love to put both of them in private school, okay? And we have 2 private schools, 2 really good private schools here where I live. And one of them, I believe the last time that my ex-wife and I looked at it, it was like $17,000 a year per kid, I believe. And then whenever they got into high school, it was like $22,000 per year per kid. So you tell me how, whenever I make more than double the federal minimum wage, and I understand that that's not the average American, but then again, at the same time, we're not all rich. So whenever I make more than double the national poverty, I make more than double the national minimum wage, and I couldn't even afford to put one of them in private school, then I don't know what this dude's talking about.
Abandon public schools. There are a few reasons, some innate to how private schools operate and some based on the responsibility of the federal government. First and foremost, it has been long established that the state has a responsibility to provide access to free education to every student. This is non-negotiable, at least for now. If public schools didn't exist, there would be students who could not afford to go to private school. Since education is a right, this is unacceptable. So, for the time being, the federal government cannot reasonably get rid of public schools entirely. The other issues stem from the private schools themselves. By their very nature, private schools are not beholden to any kind of governance when it comes to what is taught within their walls. All they have to do is provide proof that their education meets basic educational standards. This has led to an upsurge in what can be considered reactionary, or, as the schools prefer, traditional education. What this means in essence is that most private schools skew intensely religious, conservative, and insular. Their student body is overwhelmingly white, Christian, and wealthy. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with a parent wanting their child to get a religious education. But the problem is, in the US, Christianity has been co-opted by conservatism. Gone are the days.
I guess I laughed because of what he just said, right? So the private school here, because I went to the public school here, so I would love to put my kids in the private school here. And yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I'm not gonna, sugarcoat things. I've told you guys in other videos also that you want the truth. This is as truthful as it can get, for me at least, right? But yeah, the private school that I just mentioned a minute ago, and how insanely much it costs. It's actually a Christian academy. So yeah, it's a private school, mostly white, and is a religious type Christian school. Now there is another one that's here, and they're really, really good private school, and they go mostly based off of what the state academic requirements are, and they are non-religious. I'd say they're predominantly white as well, but they do have, especially over the last majority of the years, we have a good mix at that school. I really don't know the demographics between those two schools, but I do know at the Christian one is definitely a lot more, white.
Days when people understood Jesus to be a brown communist from the Middle East, who railed against the rich and preached inclusion, decency, and the value of living humbly. Most American Christians have grafted the language of conservatism onto their faith. Homophobia, racism, unfettered free market economics, and a rabid hatred for anything that could be considered even remotely socialist. This is not by accident. The political right has adopted religious, patriotic language in an attempt to secure a large and dedicated voting bloc, evangelicals, and it's worked. In modern private schools, and I should know, I attended one, it's not uncommon to see PragerU videos shown in class. It's not uncommon to see economics classes that espouse the suicidal free market ideology of Friedman and Rand. History classes portray the US as the good guy in every conflict, including those where we were clearly in the wrong. Today's supposedly Christian education would not be recognized as such by the Jesus of the Bible. Instead, it's a new religion, the religion of free market conservatism. It shouldn't come as a surprise that those in power are doing their best to get more students enrolled in private school. Indoctrinating them into the cult of capitalism while they're young is the only way they can produce more pro-corporate voters. Heck, judging by what we've seen recently, it wouldn't come as a surprise to see public schools go the same way. The previous administration even suggested the creation of a Commission for Patriotic Education, a slate of pro-America, capitalist, imperialist propaganda. This disturbing trend towards privatization and capitalist indoctrination aside, what's perhaps the bigger problem with American education is the fact that the entire system is simply outdated. Remember the Massachusetts School Board? The one established in 1837? Well, that's when the standards for education were established. The stated goal was to educate young people. But if you take a look at how school was and is structured, it becomes more clear what education was actually for. Like it is today, the school day was strictly regimented. Teachers expected absolute obedience. The bell instructed students when the day began and ended, and punishment was doled out for any perceived non-compliance. If the students retained some basic arithmetic, great. But the real goal was to produce obedient, servile workers for the factories of the Industrial Revolution. Step onto a factory floor and what's expected? Obedience, focus, the ability to follow instructions for hours on end. The day even began and ended with a bell. School was then and remains today an instrument to instill discipline, to mass-produce agreeable little cogs for the industrial machine. The standardization of schooling ensured these cogs were nice and uniform, easily replaceable and expendable. Today, nearly 2 centuries later, factory labor is no longer the prime driver of the economy. Companies still need workers, but they demand a new set of skills. Young people entering the workforce are expected to be able to be flexible, creative, and on call at unreasonable hours. Even from a capitalist perspective, modern-day schooling does not adequately prepare our students for the real world.
No, not at all. It doesn't prepare us at all for the real world. There's a lot of things that I wish I had learned in school that I didn't, or even have the opportunity to learn, right? But there's also a lot of things that I wish I'd have paid a lot more attention to, and like I said earlier, that's partly my fault. It's majority my fault because I chose not to participate. I chose to do a lot of the things that I did. Okay, I take that responsibility, right? but at the same time, yeah, we got an education system here, and especially at the public school level, that I mean has allowed this, right? Has allowed for the my psychology class to revolve around watching A&E TV, and for my art, I participated in art 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then photography 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then I was in yearbook for 2 years, and I didn't really do anything. Those 4 years of classes and schooling, I just did whatever I wanted. I showed up to class and did what I wanted. Heck, I would sit in my English class. This is true story. So in my English class of my senior year, I'm sitting in the back of the class, not in the back, but towards the back. I'm in the middle, and I'm playing on my phone, right, doing this, right, da 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 da. And what I was doing at that time is I was trading stocks, okay? And I was trading stocks because I was interested in buying a car, so that's what I did. It's just a $1,500 car, nothing special, nothing grand, anything like that. But my teacher, asked me, basically, that I wasn't doing anything of value. And at that time, I'm like, I am doing something of value. I'm over here trading stocks and learning the stock market, learning how to make a income, right, and how to invest and make worth for myself, other than going back over synonyms and different things. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know. Maybe we're just that different as Americans, I guess. I don't know. This is all new to me. Not this is new to me, but as far as, really the difference and how crazy it is, the life that I've known and lived and grew up with compared to the way that it is in other countries and the way that I've been learning and reading from you guys. Just, in the short time I've been on here, right? The comments from you guys have been, it's nuts how different it is.
Of course, preparing students for a lifetime of servitude should not be the goal of a good education. Let's examine the main issues in regards to outdatedness. Which of these two hypothetical classes sounds more applicable to real life? Latin or home economics? Guess which one is more commonly taught. If the goal of school is to prepare kids for the real world as we're meant to believe, we are doing our students a great disservice. Why don't we teach home economics classes? Why don't we teach high schoolers how to file taxes? What about useful things like basic first aid? We simply don't teach applicable skills. Then there's the fact that school curriculum just hasn't kept pace with advancements in modern technology. Basic computer classes are offered as electives, if at all. Even less common are video production, digital art, coding, web design, 3D modeling, and countless other modern skills. We're letting students down when we don't acquaint them with modern tools. As a personal anecdote, I have a younger sister who's shown a proclivity for drawing. Her school's art class, while led by a good teacher, doesn't even mention new digital techniques. Since I work creatively for a living, I took the liberty of teaching her a bit about digital art and apps like Procreate. Her skills have improved more in the last 2 months than in the previous 2 years. And I'm no artist. I just told her about the app and suggested she watch some YouTube videos. Imagine if public schools had the funding for even a handful of art tablets or iPads. Kids could come out of middle school with skills they could translate into a rewarding career or hobby by the time they graduated from high school or college. Okay, so what are some solutions we could pursue?
Okay, before we get into his solutions, let me point out here, I'm very close with people in the school system, okay? And so I can tell you for a fact that even though I live in one of the worst states for education in the country, and then on top of that, I also live in one of the worst school districts in my state. But the elementary schools here, and the entire public school system here for my district, they have iPads and all kinds of stuff. They've got a lot of digital technology. So, and this video right here is not old. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of schools and a lot of places far behind, especially in very high populated areas. But here in farm country Kentucky, and also in horrible gangland Kentucky, if you want to call it that, we do have iPads, right? We have all kinds of technology, and in fact, like I said, the kindergartners, first graders, second graders, all of them, they use iPads on a daily basis, and they are better at using the iPads than the teachers are. That's an absolute fact. So take it for what you will. I mean, you can't take every single thing for a fact, because again, this is a overall general consensus where we're talking about a whole entire country. So, you can't generalize everything as that's the way it is, right? So this is just mine particularly.
It's all well and good to say teach better classes, but that only addresses part of the problem. The root cause of many of the issues our education system faces is that we simply don't have an incentive to teach our students. As with anything in America, if there's no financial incentive, nothing will change. The profit motive is the bottom line. Private schools have an incentive to at least prepare students for standardized testing, so that their parents will be happy and keep paying tens of thousands of dollars per year for tuition. But that education comes packaged with truly damaging ideology, so making private schools more accessible would not be a long-term solution, as those students would go on to pass even more ludicrous free market education reforms. Vocational schools are an option if we truly believe the only purpose of education should be to prepare students for the job market. There's a lot to be said for picking a trade and excelling in it. Electricians, welders, AC technicians, these are all critical roles in our society. One problem with vocational schools is that they typically come with a tuition, which can be a difficult burden for many families. Homeschooling is another option, though in the US, it often carries a similar connotation to private schools. Many homeschooled children...
We have a vocational school here for our high schools, and it's not any additional fees or anything like that for the public school version. Now, I don't know if they have... I'm sure they have vocational schools for the private schools, but I don't know. But for the public version, yes, they do have. They have auto shop. They've got welding. All kinds of stuff. I had a friend who took welding over there to the vocational school, his whole high school, and he had pretty much any welding certificate you could name. So whenever he graduated high school, he had every different form of welding certificate where he could go straight into the job market like that and start in an apprenticeship and work on everything like that. So I think I just said everything like that probably 4 or 5 times. I apologize.
Come from very religious backgrounds and are kept separate from other kids their age, which can lead to serious developmental issues. That being said, there are plenty of homeschooling programs that include on-location learning, such as in museums or on community college campuses. This offers a more diverse, hands-on experience for students and can provide an excellent learning environment depending on the child. Now, that right there is something we don't discuss enough in the US. Appropriate education depends on the child. We don't all learn the same way. Some students learn more quickly than others. Some require hands-on experience. Some learn simply by watching or listening. By creating one single, standardized educational template, we're trying to standardize a whole spectrum of humanity, and that just doesn't work. There are some types of education, such as those found in Montessori schools, that try to foster a more diverse learning environment, allowing students to learn at different paces and having students who grasp subjects more quickly work with those who are struggling. This allows more...
A Montessori school? I ain't ever even heard of that.
More room for personal growth, but also fosters empathy and interpersonal skills. The jury is still out on whether Montessori schools are strictly better than more traditional education, but some studies seem to say pretty conclusively that their students fare better than those in standard schools. Overall, the moral of the story is that, like always, privatization is harming the majority in the pursuit of ever greater profits. The defunding of public schools has caused our country to slip further and further behind our peer nations. Our inability to keep up with the times has produced students who are woefully under-equipped to compete with students from other countries. Even from a capitalist perspective, it should be clear that our education system isn't working. And maybe that's the point. Maybe for the ruling class, it's desirable for the average American student to fail, so that they're forced to take the lower-paying jobs that generate huge profits for their executives. Whether that's the case or not, I think it's safe to say that we cannot expect the federal government to solve the problem. For at least the past 40 years, they've been completely controlled by massive corporations, and will continue to trend towards suicidal free market non-solutions. Instead, I would suggest that education on the community level could be a worthwhile endeavor. If we expanded the idea of homeschooling to include other members of your community, we could create localized educational templates that not only allowed for more individualized expression, but also catered towards the needs and unique perspectives of each community. Local experts could teach small classes in their respective fields. Students could learn the history of their town, city, or region. Parents could build a network of trust where they could all help supervise or teach each other's children, which in turn would strengthen the community, fostering cooperation, friendship, and empathy. These communities could engage in sort of small-scale exchange programs, day or week-long trips where students could experience the realities of different communities, which would provide them with worldly experience and a refreshing change of pace.
I mean, I like the idea, but I just don't know. I don't know that that would work. I don't even know that that's something that... Y'all know I'm very big on the prison reform and a lot of things, okay? And especially, you know, with me being a convicted felon and the different experiences, right? But education and what this guy is saying, I just don't know. We're talking about something here, and it's hard to explain, but we're talking about something here. In theory, it sounds great. In theory and on paper, it looks great. But it's one of those products that the package looks great, but the product itself doesn't work all that great. And that's exactly kind of how this feels, right? In theory, it's great, and it's a good idea. But I feel like a lot of this is kind of backwards from what I've experienced as an American and from what I've experienced personal. And also from what I know from personal people in my group that are teachers, that are school teachers, that are, involved with child education on a daily basis. So I don't know how I really feel about this, because it's just not a lot of it. Like I said, I mean, you know what I agree on because I've told you, but kind of this end part, I just don't know about some of these changes, because I don't even know how we would change this. We obviously need to teach a lot more, and gosh, I'm stumped, y'all.
We tend to get stuck in the notion that what we have now is the only possibility, whether that's in regards to healthcare, entire economic systems, or education. There
That's
are
not
so
true,
many
though.
improvements we could make.
Yes.
So many possibilities worth exploring.
Yes.
And few are more important than how we teach the next generation.
Yes. Okay, so there's Second Thought's version of what is wrong with the education system in America. And like I said, for the most part, it's pretty accurate. But there's a lot of things that I'm just not sure on because, again, you know, it's hard to really have a outside looking in whenever you really don't have an outside looking in because you've never been on the outside. So I would definitely like to know some of your thoughts, perspectives, and opinions on a lot of this stuff from what I've said and from what this guy has said on Second Thought. Before you do, though, let me give you some more background and some more information on my personal education, and so that way you have a little bit more insight onto kind of what you would do and how you might make some changes to this system, right? So my senior year, and I like to use my senior year as a basis here because it's the one that is just kind of the most broad, right? So my senior year, first period, because we had 7 classes, okay, we called them periods, but so first class was gym, and it was it was physical education, right? PE, gym, whatever you want to call it. And what we had to do for gym, it's basically we just had to show up to class, and our teacher told us as long as we weren't sitting around playing on our phone the entire time or anything like that, then we're good to go. So you would have some people that would just walk around the basketball court. You'd have some people that would throw the football around. Other people would go down to the weight room and lift weights. And really you just do whatever you want as long as you're not just sitting. And as long as you're doing something, you got an A in his class. That's it. There's your physical education. So there's my first class. Second class was anatomy and physiology, which was pretty good. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I really did enjoy that. That was a good class. Then third period was English, which I've already told you all about that. Fourth period was math, I believe, which was... I don't even know at that point. I don't even know what math it was. And then we had lunch. And then fifth period was yearbook, which I've already told you I didn't do anything in that at all. For my entire senior year, I did nothing. And yet I still got 100. Still got an A, but I didn't do anything in that class. I didn't even participate. I didn't even show up half the time. A lot of times I just didn't even show up, didn't even go to class. Actually, my senior year, for the first half of the year, I would leave school. I wasn't even at school for like the first 2 hours because I was going over to a playground that the city was building, And because I was on photography and I was on the art club and all that for the school, I was allowed to leave school for 2 hours a day to go over to the playground they were building to help paint it. So there's my education, right? As I went and helped paint the playgrounds. And let's see, then after that, sixth period was welding. And then after welding, because that was only half the year, the other half of the year was small engine repair. Those were electives that I chose to take. So I participated in those. And then the last class of the day, the seventh period, was psychology, and which I've already told you on that one. Psychology, we learned about hoarding, right, from a reality TV show. So now let's get to the story about me getting suspended from school. So my senior year, there was a time where I live at, there's a lot of gangs, okay? There's 23 active gangs in the city that I live. We were in class. This was sixth period, I believe, seventh period. So we're in sixth period, and out of nowhere, there's a bunch of banging on the door to the classroom, okay? Now, again, in all of our classrooms and all that, whenever the class starts, all the doors are shut and they're locked from the outside because of school shootings and all that good stuff that you know about. So because they're all locked, there was a gentleman, a student, right, on the outside in the hallway trying to get into the classroom, okay? Now, there was a student inside of our classroom, in the class that I'm in, who knew who the student outside in the hallway was, okay? Now, this wasn't a student from our school. All right, the guy in our class had transferred from another school, and the guy in the hallway was a student from the school that he had transferred from, okay? And apparently, since there was gang relations, the dude in the hallway from a different school, he was trying to get into the classroom to attack this gentleman. So the gentleman in my class is just going wild as well, and he's trying to get outside the classroom into the hallway to attack the gentleman from the other school. And he's got a pair of scissors in his hand, and he's holding them because he's ready to fight and stab this guy. And the only reason why it didn't happen is because his friend, who was also in our class, he was full on bear hugging him, holding him back, and almost physically fighting him to keep him from making it to the door, so that way that door didn't get opened and there'd be, essentially bloodshed, because that's what would have happened. Those scissors would have went into somebody, rather it would have been him or him or him or him, right? So during all of this, it's going wild because the teacher, she's not doing anything about it. She's sitting there at the desk just kind of in shock, just watching this, not doing anything. And it's just kind of like, stop it, put the scissors down. It's, da-da-da-da-da. And so, me being 18 and in high school, this is wild, right? So I pull out my phone and I start recording it, all right? And police show up and everything else, da-da-da-da-da. They get it resolved and they take the gentleman away. Okay, that's it. That's the end of it. So I get home, tell my parents about it, and I ended up putting it on YouTube, right? Because it all shows up. Look at all this craziness on YouTube, okay? So I put it on YouTube, and like 2 days later, I get called to the principal's office because the teacher had apparently been informed about the video because students had seen it and someone had mentioned it, and she was embarrassed about it. And she didn't like that she was put on YouTube. So she filed a complaint against me. And so the school suspended me from school for a whole week, 5 days. The actual suspension paperwork said that I was suspended because of using unauthorized recording device during school hours, i.e. my cell phone. So because I was using my cell phone during school hours, that's why I was suspended. And the other student, the one who had the pair of scissors, who was trying to get out of the classroom to stab the student from the other school, no, he didn't get suspended. He didn't get anything. He actually was in classroom the very next day as if nothing happened. And you want to know why? Because he was on the football team. Because he played sports, and because sports is a very big deal in high school. he got basically looked over, and I was punished because I made it public. So that's, yeah, that's craziness. Now, I did not actually go through with that suspension because my father came to the school and basically told the principal that, it was not appropriate, and that, we would take down the video from YouTube as long as they removed my suspension and I was able to go back to school. And which they didn't want to do that, so my dad had threatened to basically send it to the newspaper, to the media outlets and all that, and let them run a story on it, how I got suspended for a cell phone and was recording it for, video evidence for my own safety in case something happened. And the dude who was trying to assault somebody with a deadly weapon, was ignored because he was on the football team. So yeah, that's the type of education that I received. So if you think that's, you can take that however you want. Again, it's all up to you. But that's, yeah, that's my education. That's mine. Public school, right? So anyways, that's enough. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you did, that's wonderful. That's great. That's awesome. And if you didn't, that's okay too. I respect that. That's your opinion. But yeah, I would be interested to know your comments and what you think would be good resolutions for us, and what would be, changes that you would make to our school system and to our public and private schools. So anyways, that's enough. It's me, Bryson P. I hope you had a good day, good night, whatever time it is that you are watching this, and goodbye.